In this video, we're going to see how do we make a frequency distribution with 5 classes, as well as how to make frequency histograms and relative frequency histograms. So here we have a set of data which lists out the test grades from one of my previous classes. So I'm going to start by sorting the data smallest to largest just to get it in order. So to do that, I'm going to highlight my data and then go up to where it says sort and filter and sort smallest to largest. Now it's really easy to see the maximum and the minimum. And wow, there's quite a variety on these test grades. I had a lot of people get like 99s and 97s and then a 15. So you can tell that person didn't study very much. Alright, so we're told that we want 5 classes. First thing we need to figure out is our range, which range is our maximum minus our minimum. And then to get our class width, which I'm abbreviating by CW, we take our range and divide it by the number of classes, which is 5. And then we always round up, so our class width is going to be 17. Then we list out our lower class limits and our upper class limits. Our first lower class limit is always the minimum, which is 15 in this case. And then we take a previous lower class limit and add to it our class width to get the next one. The difference from a lower class limit to a lower class limit is the class width. So we'll add our class width to get the next lower class limit, and then I can hover over the bottom right hand corner and drag that down until I have 6 lower class limits. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, I need 5 of them, not 6. So 5 lower class limits since we want 5 classes. And then to figure out our upper class limits, we need to figure out where should the first class stop so that we don't overlap the second class and we don't leave any gaps. So our first class starts at 15, it's 15 to something, and then the next one starts at 32, so it's 32 to something, so we've got to figure out where should this one stop so it doesn't overlap with the 32. So it would make sense for our first class to stop at 31, so it'll be 15 to 31, and then we can do 32 to something, and that way the two classes don't leave anything out, but they don't overlap. And then also the difference from upper class limit to upper class limit is our class width. So if I add 17 repeatedly again, we'll get all of our upper class limits. You don't always need to, but if you want to find the midpoint, all we would do is we would take our lower and upper class limits and add them together inside of parentheses, and then divide that by 2. So we're averaging the lower and upper class limits, dividing by 2 to find the midpoint. So that tells us the middle value for each one of our classes. And then I always like to just write out my classes in one cell, so 15 to 31, 32 to 48, and so on. I think it makes it a little bit nicer when it's time to make the histogram to have it written out all together. You don't necessarily have to do this step. You can label it with the midpoints. You can label the histogram with the midpoints if you wanted to. Alright, so time to figure out our frequencies. So our first one is 15 to 31. Well, we have one data point that's 15 to 31, so our frequency is 1. Next one's 32 to 48. So in that range we have, looks like 2 data points, so next frequency is 2. See, 49 to 65. If you look down here, kind of at the bottom middle, it gives you the count. So we see that we have 5 data points in that span. So our frequency is 5. Then 66 to 82, we have 4. And I'm just highlighting these different colors to try to keep myself organized. And then 83 to 99 is our last one. We have 10. So we have our different frequencies. And if we sum up our frequencies, we'll find the total number of data points. So this class had 22 students that took this particular test. And you may be thinking, this is kind of an odd way to do classes. Typically we do it by A's, B's, C's, and so on. And yes, it is a little bit different, but it's a good example for us to practice 2.1. Okay, next we need our relative frequencies. To find our relative frequencies, we take the frequency and then divide it by our total. So we'll take our first class's frequency and divide it by the total of 22. I'm going to drag that down. So this tells us the proportion or the percentage that each class takes up. So we can see that we had 45% of our class getting between an 83 and a 99 on the test. That's really good. And if we sum our relative frequencies, they should sum to 1 to represent that we have 1 or 100% of the possibilities. And they do, so that's good. Last thing we could find is our cumulative frequencies. Cumulative frequencies tells you how many data points you have down to that line in the chart. So our first line we only have 1. There's one little data point, one person that got a 15. And then to get the next one, we take the data points we have plus any additional data points that we got in the next row. So we had 1 plus 2 more gave us a total of 3. In the next row we're going to add 5 more. So if we drag that formula down, it should get us up to 8, which it does. Then we get 4 more to 12, and then 10 more to 22. So notice our final cumulative frequency should be the same as our sample size to indicate that we have all of our data points accounted for. Awesome, so now we need to make our graphs. To make our graphs, I'm going to start by highlighting my frequencies and then insert a column chart, just that very first basic 2D column chart. And then I'm going to go up to the Design tab and change my chart layout to Layout 8, which will make all the bars touch. That makes it a histogram. The bars have to touch. So across the bottom we have our class, or maybe I'll call it our grades. We have our frequencies going up the side, and maybe I'll call the chart test grades. And this is looking pretty good, except we don't want our grades to be labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We need to change those bottom labels. So this is our horizontal axis. To change it, I need to right-click and go to Select Data. And then where it says Horizontal Axis Labels, we need to Edit. And then I'm going to highlight where I typed in my classes, so it actually says like 15 to 31, and 32 to 48, and so on. You could have highlighted your midpoints there. It doesn't really matter as long as you have something that's labeled and makes sense on your graph. And so there we have our frequency histogram, where we see the number of students that scored into each of these different classes. And again, you can see that this class did really well. Most of them, almost half the class, got between an 83 and a 99 on the test, which is awesome. So that is our frequency histogram. If we want to make a relative frequency histogram, it's very similar, but we start by highlighting our relative frequencies, and then insert column, first 2D column. Again, go up to the Design tab, change your layout to Layout 8. So we have our grade going across the bottom. This time we have relative frequency going up the side. And again, this is test grades. And same thing, we see that our bars are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That doesn't make any sense. So we need to right-click on a bar, go to Select Data, edit our horizontal axis labels, and then again I'm going to highlight my classes, where it says 15 to 31, 32 to 48, and so on, to get my classes down there. And let me see if I can get both of these graphs on the same page. Might be covering up some stuff, but I want us to see this. You notice these two graphs are identical. The only thing that's different is the scale going up the vertical column. In our frequency histogram, we're counting the data points in each class. In our relative frequency histogram, we're showing the percentage of the data that's in each class. But the shape and everything else is exactly the same as it should be, because this is a display showing the exact same set of data.